are we talking about this? Because we're about to wrap up our rotor job on our Malibu steel. Now, Malibu steel's not here in the garage right now, but I will be bringing it in tomorrow, and we're going to finish up the rear brakes. Now, if you guys look back at the channel, I've already done one on brakes. You guys got to see the back half of that video. So the back half was me already had it all apart, and I was going back into the reassembly process. What's going to happen now is I'm going to go into the reassemble, or basically the teardown portion of it, so that you guys have the full video to look at. It was quite a bit of work, so I couldn't just do it all in one live. So I decided to break it up. The first one was on reassembly. This one's going to be on the teardown. You guys will see everything that's going on. I'm just changing my chat for you guys here so I can see all messages. Okay. Again, this one's going to be on pads and rotors. We're going to discuss a few things and kind of why I went the way I went with the brakes that I have. And again, as always, you guys can chat in your questions down below. I'll read them on screen. Hopefully I can help you guys answer your questions to your projects, and we can kind of work on this together and hopefully get you guys the info you need. Okay, so as I always state, here are the announcements. Guys, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, and ring the notification bell. That way you guys get notified when I go live. My lives are always on Sunday between 1 and 2 p.m. I try to keep it, pretty consistent, but it's always between the 1 and 2 p.m. You guys can catch me here on Sundays. And I'm doing a few, but I am going to be going back to work soon at my main job, which means I won't be doing daily lives like I have been in the past. So again, once that happens, it will be every Sunday about the 1 to 2 o'clock time slot, Central Time. Let's go ahead and get into it. So we're talking about brakes because we've already done a brake project on Malibu steel. What are some things to know when you're buying brakes? Let's cover the pads first, and then we'll get into the rotors last. So the first thing you're going to want to know is what kind of pad material you're going to want to go with. Do you want to go with a semi-metallic? Do you want to go with an organic? Or do you want to go with a full ceramic pad? So the ceramic pads are the higher quality. You will pay more for ceramics always. What are some of the advantages of ceramic over the other ones? So ceramics don't leave brake dust. This is an awesome thing to know because brake dust gets all over everything, the side of the vehicle, rims, suspension components, and that stuff can be very nasty to get off unless you use a iron breakdown material. I do know Chemical Guys makes a rim cleaner that removes iron. That will remove any of the brake dust from the semi-metallic and some of the organic or base model pads. Those pads throw off a lot of dust. So if you ever look at a rim and it's completely dusty and black, it's because they didn't use the ceramic pads. I use ceramics in every vehicle I have because brake dust is annoying and I don't want to damage or destroy rims. Rims can easily get damaged and destroyed if too much brake dust gets on them. It will break down the clear coat. And that clear coat, once it's gone, you have to take and bead blast off the rim and repaint it. That can be an annoying process. We will see that process this winter when I park Malibu steel. We are going to do a rim painting video on that vehicle. And the only reason I'm doing it is because they're looking kind of bad. It's time for me to refresh them, upgrade them, make them look better. So that will be the plan for this winter as far as one of the videos. We're going to have actually a couple of videos on that particular topic, but I won't be talking about the brake dust portion anymore because we're doing this in this video. Ceramic pads are the #1 way to go, but you pay for them. They're much more expensive. What are some of the advantages? Well, longer pad life is one of them. Ceramics will have a much higher pad life, meaning that they're going to last a lot longer than your conventional pads. What are some of your other advantages to ceramics? Ceramics handle heat very well. meaning if you have to stomp on the brakes and hold them for a long period of time, almost bringing the vehicle to a stop, your ceramic pads will hold up better than your semi-metallic or your base pads. Semi-metallics are a cheaper way to go, but there is some huge disadvantages to the semi-metallics. The semi-metallics will leave a lot of brake dust, and when they absorb heat, they will cause brake fade. Let's talk about brake fade, because this really does get into the quality material of the pad and why this happens. So brake fade is very dangerous. What happens is your pads develop heat. As that heat hits the pad, it starts to lose pressure, gripping force on the rotor. So your pads will sandwich between your rotor and they pinch down on that rotor. What happens is the semi-metallics will get hot and you'll get a brake fade, meaning that it'll start feeling like the brakes are loosening up. And it's because you're actually melting the pad as you're pressing the pedal down and it's slipping. And it's not binding and holding tight. The ceramic pads don't do that as easy. You can do it with these, but it's a lot more difficult. Let's do a little wrap up here with the pad materials. You have the base pads, which are trash. I would never use them. You have semi-metallics, which will kind of work, but they leave brake dust and they can brake fade. My top choice is always going to be ceramics on every vehicle I do. It makes the most sense and it's the safest way to go. What do we look for when we're looking at the pads themselves when we take them apart? We're looking for how much the pad has crushed down or worn away. We're also looking to see if it's worn unevenly, meaning that it's higher on one side than the other. If this happens, this means that your pads are twisting and not staying straight to that rotor, and it's wearing them unevenly. This can happen for a few different reasons. One of them is your slides for your caliper may not be straight anymore. Something might have happened that bent the slides and the caliper is not moving straight to the rotor. It's going at an angle, which means it wears the pads at an angle. The other condition to look for on pads is if you have one pad that's lower than the other pad, meaning you take it apart and one pad has more material on it, one has less. Why is this? This is because the pad got locked into the bracket. When that pad gets locked into the bracket, it will wear that pad down really fast. Plus, it also heat soaks the rotor. That means you will have to put new rotors on when you do a brake job. Before we cover the rotor portion of it, when do you basically only replace pads? Okay, so my mechanic guys are really going to get frustrated with this because, okay, mechanics themselves, the people who work on their own cars, this is what they do. They will do what they call a pad slap on their own vehicles. The reason why is if your rotors are in good shape, you can get away with repadding and not replacing the rotors. This only works if your rotors are not warped. If they're warped, you have to replace everything. You don't have a choice. I will cover in just a little bit a trick and something to watch out for if you take it into a repair shop. But mechanics that work on their own cars will do a pad slap. How many pad slaps do I recommend? I only recommend one set of pad slaps ever on a set of rotors. Meaning that if you're going to do a pad slap, you put a fresh set of rotors on it, run the pads down, put one set more of pads in it when the current pads wear out. Make sure they're ceramics. You swap them out, but the next time you do those brakes, when you're doing your third set of pads, it gets new rotors. That way, you always have good rotors on the vehicle. Again, we're going to cover in just a little bit why the rotors are so important that you do this at a right time. But for pad wise, that's what you can get away with. You can get away with one pad slap on one set of rotors, meaning one rotor, two sets of pads. That is what a lot of mechanics that work on their own cars will do. Let's talk about the little trick or the scam, I want to say, when it comes to taking your vehicle to a shop and what happens when it's time to do your brakes. They're going to look at your vehicle, and for liability reasons, this is what they're going to do. They're going to charge you for rotors, pads, and calipers with brackets, meaning they're going to just replace all your brakes from the hose all the way onto the wheel. Why are they doing this? Well, number one, they can sell more parts. When they sell more parts, they'll make more money. They also can charge more labor. So that's the other factor. What's the biggest issue of why they do it? Well, that part is really simple. It's safety reason. If you get a vehicle that a shop does a pad slap and all of a sudden your brakes start vibrating or your rotors don't hold tight and you get in an accident, they are on the hook for liability reasons. So in order to save themselves that liability, they flat out tell you, we're just going to replace it all. We're not even going to give you the chance to go with the cheaper option, even if all your other components are good. I don't replace calipers unless calipers have damage to them, meaning the slides are bad, the caliper's bent, it's leaking, or the seal around the plunger, the piece that pushes the pads together, if that seal around that plunger's tore, then you have to. You have to put in a new caliper. Do not replace or do the brakes if you have a situation like that, especially if it's a winter vehicle and you live in the Rust Belt. When that seal is torn, what happens is moisture and water get into that caliper. What will happen is that caliper could lock up, and when it locks up, it won't release. So this is why the shops will overcharge you guys when you take it in to do a brake job, because they're looking at it from their side liability-wise. How can they protect themselves? I know it's frustrating, but that's what they do. So we've covered pads and what's going on with them and why it's important to do what we do with the pads and how to check them. Let's go ahead and get into the rotors. So we have a couple different styles of rotors, guys. It isn't just straight up simple one way. This has different things that you can look at as far as brake performance, longevity, what you can expect for life out of the brakes, and stopping distance. This is the most important factor of why we do certain rotor styles, is for the stopping distance. If we can't stop in a certain distance, we're going to get into an accident. There's just no way around it. Well, in order to prevent that, we may do a brake upgrade. You guys have already seen part of this brake upgrade in my live videos, in my podcasts. Again, if you guys want to check that out after this video. You guys can go to my page, go under podcasts, and you'll see that video that we did the brakes. You'll see that brake upgrade, but you're going to see what I did here, and I'm going to explain it to you here. So I'll get you guys a little bit more in depth, but that one will show you guys the reassemble process. All right, so here is a stock rotor. This is stock, meaning that it has the place where the pads will ride, and it has these fins. These fins are for cooling. As the rotor spins, it throws the heat out of the rotor. This is what you need in order to even make a brake work, especially front brakes. Let's quickly cover why you need those fins on front brakes, but you may not see them on back brakes. Front brakes do the majority of the work when it comes to stopping a vehicle, meaning you press on the brakes, your front brakes might do 60 to 70% of your stopping. Your back brakes may only do about 20%. They're not going to do the majority of the work, meaning you're not going to have as much heat in the back brakes. You're going to have most of your heat in the brakes in the front. So they need to engineer and design rotors that can disperse that heat quickly so you don't get that condition that we just talked about, brake fade. Also, they do this so that it doesn't warp the rotor. If you warp that rotor when you hit the brakes, it's going to pulse. That pedal will pulse. And that's a sign that you have a warped rotor, because what's happening is it's slightly out of alignment, and as the pads hit it, it'll stop in one place, but it'll slide in another. That is a dangerous condition, and sometimes it can lead to the vehicle going out of control. So if you have a pedal that's pulsing, get your brakes checked out. Make sure you get good components put in it and get that fixed. It really does make a huge difference on stopping distance, and in an emergency, you're going to need it. So what can we expect with brake upgrades? Well, what I'm going to show you guys is the rear rotor, and the rear one, again, does not have the cooling fins like we just talked about. But the ones on my front look exactly like the one I showed you, only the face of them look like this. What are these? What are these little holes and these slots? For all my mechanics, I know you guys are already saying you're boring me with details. I make some of these videos to help educate other people, so it's not always straight, cut forward, here's the layout, or here's what you need to do. Sometimes I'll break down what's going on with this so that people understand. So the drilled and slotted rotors are designed for increased braking pressure. They're also designed for getting heat out of the rotor quickly, meaning that if you don't have the drilled and slotted, you could absorb more heat into a stock rotor setup that doesn't have the drilled holes or the slots. The drilled and slotted will release that heat quickly and get rid of it, but you must install the rotor on the vehicle properly. A lot of people mess this one up, especially if they just buy these brake kits off of Amazon or eBay. They'll make the mistake of putting the rotor on in the wrong direction. Direction matters on drilled and slotted rotors. Let's cover why. It matters because the direction of the holes and the direction of the slots aid in releasing the heat out of the rotor. If those are not in the right direction, it actually pushes the heat into the rotor and causes the rotor to get hotter, not colder. Why do we want cooler rotors? Because the more the rotors heat up, the quicker we're going to have brake fade. You guys can see this on race cars when people are going around a racetrack and you see the bright red circle inside their wheel. That's because they're holding the brake. They might be going through a cornering situation where they need to use brakes extensively. They might be trying to slow down for a corner, so they have to hit them harder. These are all conditions that cause the heat. Why would we want to get rid of that heat quickly? So we don't have the brake fade. Let's take a look at this rotor right here. So here the slots are going back and the holes are drilled going back. When we install this rotor, we want this rotor in the direction that it's spinning to throw off the heat. We don't want it to get pushed in. So what does that look like? If the rotor's turning like this, the heat is going to go this way. It's going to come out of the vents. If you're going this way, if it looks like it's cutting on the vehicle, like it's cutting in the direction that the wheel goes at highway speed, then it's going to push that heat into the rotor. That's what can damage rotors and which will cause brake fade quickly. It's important to make sure that the fins are going in the right direction. You never want them cutting in the highway direction. So this means the speed where you're going 65, 70 miles an hour, you don't want that heat getting forced into the rotor. You want that heat being spun off of the rotor. The only way to do that is to make sure that it is going. It's better if I show you, because if I try to say it, I don't want anyone to get confused. It's better to see it spin off the rotor than to see it being pushed into the rotor. You don't ever want it cutting in. You want it to sling out. This is the most important part to a brake upgrade like this. If you put these rotors on and you install them in the wrong direction, they're actually worse than the stock brakes. And it's a mistake that is often made. I've gone to many car shows, looked inside their wheels to see what kind of brake upgrades they've done, whether they've done Brembo brakes, whether they've done drilled and slotted rotors. I always look at the minor or small details, the little things that most people don't look at. And too many times have I seen the rotors put in the wrong direction, meaning they put the driver's side on the passenger and the passenger on the driver. You don't ever rotate rotors, ever. Once they're on a vehicle, they stay in that position until you replace them. So, knowing that, they installed them in the wrong direction. They installed it to where when it goes down the highway, those slots are actually cutting towards the direction that they're driving. You don't want that. You want them to be back. So as it spins, it flings it off. This is what will be the most effective for anyone that's building a track car or anything like that. Some will not, or some places will not even let you do these kind of brake upgrades on a track setup, especially if it's competitive in nature and you have a specific car build that you have to do. They may say you have to run a specific rotor. They'll say you may have to run a stock rotor. You can't run a performance upgraded rotor. Some will not have any restrictions. It all is based on the rules of the track and what class you're in. Some classes, it's open. You can do whatever you want as long as you keep the motor size to the regulation that they want, as long as you don't do anything crazy that gives you an unfair advantage, then they pretty much let you do whatever you want. Others are really tight. NASCAR is really tight. NASCAR only lets you do certain things. And in fact, they only let you buy parts from certain places, meaning their tires come from one supplier, their brakes come from one supplier. That way they can control that everyone has the same parts. Because in NASCAR, it isn't about the car. It isn't about how well you can make the car run. It's about the driver and his skill. That's what NASCAR really is about. It's not about anything else. Let's go ahead and get into a little bit of the racing side of things, guys. I want to explore this topic a little deeper on the brake side because it does really matter. It doesn't matter if you're drag racing or circle track or even circuit track racing. Brakes are always used on any racing application. And some places, the brake upgrades really matter. On a circuit track race where you're making left turns and right turns, you might have straightaways, spots where you have to do a hard stop or slow down. You want to make sure you have brakes that are going to stop the car. Like Indy cars are similar to NASCAR. They will only let you run certain components. But if you go to a drifting course with your car, you might want to think about doing this slotted and drilled rotor because the upgrade will give you the advantage of bringing that vehicle to a stop or slowing it down before a corner a lot quicker. What does that mean? That means you can run harder down the long stretches and brake at the last possible minute to slow down for that corner. If you have stock rotors, you're going to have to brake sooner, which means you can't accelerate as long down that straightaway before you have to get off the gas and hit the brake to get down to speed to make that corner. If you wind up overdoing it, you'll get that brake fade we talked about, and then you won't be able to make the corner. You will go off the corner, or you'll lose control during braking. Another thing to look at is drag racers. Drag racers use what they call a line lock. Now, will a line lock make a difference on a stock rotor versus a drilled and slotted? Probably not, because you're not moving. The vehicle is clamping the brakes and keeping it from moving at basically no pressure on the vehicle. Once you release the line lock though, you're good, you're gone. And when you have movement, that's when your brakes have to be able to stop you the most. So if you have the movement, that's where it's the most important. So where would drilled and slotted rotors be the most helpful to drag racers? On the back end of the track. That's right. On the back end, they're going to need good brakes to bring that car to a stop, especially at high speed. The thing is that they will get going so fast that even a drilled and slotted rotor setup is not enough to stop the car. And they don't have enough space to really run that car all the way out and use the brakes to bring it to a stop. Because even though they're going a quarter mile, their brakes because they're trying to go as light as possible, may not be strong enough to stop that car unless they had another quarter mile or slightly more to bring that vehicle to a stop. That's the scary thing, is when you're dealing with a situation like that, what happens? How do you stop a vehicle? Well, one good way that you can do that is they use parachutes. So they pull the parachute comes out, and that does the majority of the stopping, and then they assist with the brakes. We got one from Carlos. I bet you stop a lot of cars because you're cute. I always like a little bit of humor in my chat. It's nice to see you guys come in and drop in your messages. I like reading what you guys have to post. Again, as long as people keep it respectful, it's all good. So, getting back to the racing applications. Like I said, NASCAR, they will choose what rotors you can run. It's all set up. They only run certain parts. They don't get to buy from whatever manufacturer. They can't slap whatever parts they want on it. It's just kind of the way they run things. And a lot of it is done for safety. Some of it is done for competitiveness. They want to make sure that the drivers are competitive, not the cars competing against other cars. Because you can have a very unfair advantage if your car is able to do things that nobody else's car can. And we've seen NASCAR guys pull a lot of tricks. I'm just going to go off on a little tangent here. So it wasn't too long ago, maybe a few years ago, there was a NASCAR crew that decided to pull the bottom part of the rear fender out, or the rear quarter panel. This causes the wind to hit that curve on that quarter panel and go out, so the wind doesn't catch the tire. This gave them an unfair advantage on the top end, because what happened was it was removing drag on the car. That drag was giving them an unfair advantage against other cars that did not have that quarter panel bent out. The reason that they got caught and the reason that there was a change is because the crew that was bending them out ran into a car. I'm pretty sure you guys can look it up. It happened to Jeff Gordon. Somebody ran into his car with that fender pulled out, and it sliced the tire up. Because of that, NASCAR had to crack down. It's little modifications like that that they can't allow when they want drivers to be competitive with drivers, meaning it's a driver's skill race. It's not a car performance race. You see this a lot in, I almost hate saying this, but when you deal with drag racing that does what they call bracket racing. Bracket racing is literally you race against yourself, and if you drive over your time, then you basically run the light. So you get disqualified. What you'll do is you'll do, 2, 3, sometimes 4 runs. You'll average those 4 runs out. That time will decide what your time is when you go to actually race against other people. Whoever gets the closest to their time that they have on the window without going over will win. That's bracket racing. I've never been a fan of bracket drag racing. I think that it tries to make things more competitive for people that invest less money, but ultimately it hurts the sport because then people don't have to try as hard. You can have people go out with a stock vehicle, automatic, and be lightning fast and consistent because it's an automatic, but yet they still might not be very fast. That's why we see a lot of pickup trucks coming into the drag racing now, because they can bracket race using the bracket racing rules and get away with it. Not a fan. So that's where, when you start going into, I don't want to say Street Outlaws, guys, because Street Outlaws, we already know, is somewhat of a scripted show. For the most part, I don't want to say they know who's going to win, but they've got it all kind of figured out on what's the best for the show and all that. So I kind of lost base with Street Outlaws only after about 2 or 3 seasons, because the cars really got ridiculous. At that point, they were taking drag cars, full-on drag race cars on the street. And that, to me, that's not doing any good. That's, yes, they were still trying to be safe and they were using the safety regulations, but to me, that wasn't it. But that is an example of a situation, especially on street racing, where you're going to work to make your car better than anyone else's on the street. Well, if you don't race in a straight line and you have corners and you have to slow down and speed up, you're going to work on your motor, you're going to work on performance, your transmission. You're also going to upgrade your rotors because you're going to want to run the throttle as long as you can so that you can back off of it and then be able to accelerate again. The shorter braking distance means longer throttle time. That's why we do these kind of upgrades. It's not only for that reason, but it's also longevity. On a street application, these rotors will last a lot longer than the stock ones. They don't warp as easy, meaning we can run our pad slap without worrying about rotor warp. Also, they will last longer. The material is stronger, it's heavier, it's more condensed, and we don't have to worry about it wearing out the rotors prematurely. Stock rotors, there are some stock rotors out there that are so cheap, I'd throw them after the first use. The reason why is they wear down so fast and they get heat soaked so much that they do warp very easy. I would never buy your base model of any kind of brakes, whether it be your rotor, your pads, or anything. Never buy the base model to it. Always try to go for middle or upper level, meaning ceramic and good quality rotors. Don't buy the cheapest rotors they got. Don't buy the cheapest pads they got. If you're doing your brakes on your own, you definitely don't want to go cheap. Let's cover one last thing that's super, super important when it comes to brakes when you're changing them. So when you're changing your brakes, it's super important to remember sometimes I deal with other stuff on my recorder, guys. Sorry about that. So it's super important when you're changing your pads, put the new shims in. Do not ever reuse shims. The reason why is those brake shims is where the pad slides. That can cause the pad to lock into place like we talked about earlier. Those shims need to be replaced with every set of pads. Here is an example of what happens when you buy stuff online. Here's my pads. Here's my box. No shims. So this means I had to go get my own shims because you cannot replace these pads without putting shims in. Also, when we go to put our rotor on, what do we have to do to the rotor before we even assemble this onto the vehicle? We need to spray that rotor with brake clean, and we have to get the oil off of that rotor from the manufacturer. Why do they oil those rotors? To keep them from rusting while they sit in a box on a shelf. If they didn't oil them, they would look like this within a month or two. Meaning you'd have rust all over them, and it would just be stuff you would have to clean off. You don't want the rust on the brake surface here either. So when it sits, they oil these so that you don't get that rust on here. Because if you have to take and mill these down as soon as you buy them, you're already cutting into the life of the rotor. So you don't want to do that. Last topic that I'm going to want to talk about before we go ahead and shift into the news, guys. Turning rotors. What do we feel about that? I don't like turning rotors. The reason why is they wear down the thickness of the rotor, and at a certain point the rotor becomes too thin. The thinner the rotor, the quicker they build up heat. The quicker they build up heat, the sooner you have brake fade. There's one condition that I haven't talked about until now, and it's what we call glazing. Glazing is when your pads will glaze over, meaning that no matter how hard you press the brake, it's not going to stop any faster, or may not stop at all. When you glaze your brakes, they're done. It doesn't matter how thick the pad is that's left on it. And when you glaze them, you can also glaze the rotors, meaning that they become so heat soaked that even if you put a new set of pads on, they won't stop, or they will stop very poorly. It's because you've glazed the rotors, you've held the brakes too long to where it glazed the pads and the rotor, meaning that it doesn't have the stopping pressure. So even though they look brand new, if you glaze these pads, they're done. How do you glaze pads? Okay. For those that have may not been through a decent driving course or have only listened to driver ed instructors over, I would say, the last probably 20 years, here's some information for you. When you want to stop, you don't press your brake pedal down and hold it the whole time. The longer you hold the pad, the more heat gets built up in the rotors. You need to pump your brakes when you want to come to a stop. So you press it down, let it up, press it down, let it up until you come to a stop. That little bit of letting it up takes the heat out of the rotor. You want the heat to go away so you don't glaze your brakes. That is super important in every driving aspect, even when you're starting to get into the racing side. You don't want to build up a tremendous amount of heat and glaze everything over, because your brakes are going to be shot and you're going to have to replace them before your next race, meaning that's a ton of work to do and maybe not a lot of time to do it. So these are the things we definitely want to know when we're dealing with our brakes. When we look at them and we see that they're glazed, what do they look like? Well, everything's shiny. You know, your rotor is super, super shiny, more shiny than this. Basically, it'll look like a mirror. If you can look into this and it looks like a mirror, then you glazed the rotors. If you look at the pads and the pads look shiny, then you glazed the pads, meaning that you held the brakes too long, you built up too much heat in it, and you messed them up. So, for anyone who has not gone through that or understood what that was, guys, there's a pro tip for you. When you have your car, don't just hold your pad or your pedal to the floor. Make sure you let up, get that heat out of there, and then press it back down. It works the best, even in big trucks. If you're driving a semi application, you don't want to just stomp it down and hold it. Yes, you may have to, if you have to come to an emergency stop. You may not have the time to let up and press it back down, but it's a good thing to get into a habit doing it on a regular basis, so that when it comes down to those emergency settings, you can go ahead and press it down all the way and hold it and know that you're going to come to a stop because you haven't already messed up your brakes. So I hope that helps with that part of it. Let's go ahead and get into some of the new stuff I've been putting out. And guys, Stellantis is in a world of trouble. Their situation is just going from bad to worse. And why is that? Because they've chosen to make some really bad moves. Some of those moves involve them choosing to buy Dodge, Ram, and Jeep as a shell company. I have some insider information on this, guys. It sounds like Stellantis is shell companying that whole thing. So they only bought Dodge, Jeep, Ram, and Chrysler to shell company it so they can sell cars in the US. This is a bad thing for people that own Ram products, Jeep products, Dodge products. This means it's going to be harder to find parts. I do have information on one customer that reached out to me and he asked me, what do I do? He's like, I got a vehicle and they're telling me they can't get the airbag that's a recall. And I warned him, I said, if you take that in to do the recall, what they're going to do is they're going to park your vehicle. They're not going to let you drive it, and they will not unhook the airbag and let you go home with it, meaning that you're not going to have your car. And as long as they can't get the airbags, they're not going to be able to fix it, meaning you just handed them a car and you'll never get it back. So I told them what I would do is wait until they have airbags in their possession. If they don't have them in their possession, you do not drop your car off with them, because once you drop it off, you'll never get it back. And this has become kind of a running theme here with what's going on over on the Dodge, Ram, and Jeep company. It's kind of becoming the standard that Stellantis, the owners of that brand, are starting to not produce parts. They're having a hard time getting parts from certain suppliers, and they're also producing bad vehicles. You guys already know how I've talked about the e-torque and the really bad side of e-torque. We're finding out that the Hemis are going to be gone next year. Gone. They will not exist. So Ram is going with EV option or the Hurricane 4-cylinder twin turbo. Those are your only two options. You will not have a V8 powered option in Ram in 2025. They've already said it. They've already put it out. It's already slated to be, this is the last year of the Hemis. Unfortunately, it's hard to find a Hemi now that isn't that horrible e-torque that I talked about. The e-torque is horrible for a few different reasons. Number one, the hybrid system is extremely glitchy, meaning that it was made cheaply and it's got some severe problems. They didn't fix it or do any upgrades to it, meaning that we're always going to have these problems. And because there's no upgrade, we're going to have to eat the cost from the dealer, but the dealer can always choose to no longer make the parts. This is becoming a vicious cycle with these guys, and I don't trust the products that they've put out in probably the last 5 years. I don't trust it. I'm starting to see bad things coming down the pipe for that particular car brand, and it's not the direction I would choose to go long term. Looking at GM, GM has chosen to stick with the gas engine. They are keeping their LS line of motors. So they're going to continue making the V8 LS style engines. This is a good thing, but at the same time, we already know that they're choosing to do cylinder cutout. Cylinder cutout is very rough on lifters and does have its own failure issues that are extremely expensive. If you have anything that has multiple displacement, meaning whether it's collapsible lifters or an MDS setup, what I suggest to you is either find a way to get it disabled or shut it off, or make sure you do your oil changes on time. Do not go over the 4,000 miles per oil change. The reason why is the valving in a lot of these components, especially GM. It's not so bad on the older Dodge MDS setups, but it is bad on the GM setups. A lot of their small valving that they have in the lifters and on their synchronizers require to have clean oil. If you get anything plugged in there, what happens is it throws the timing off and it causes the lifter to stick. If the lifter sticks and it opens at the wrong time, it could smash the piston or break the lifter. That happens, you're doing a full engine teardown and rebuilding the whole thing. It is something bad about GMs that they need to figure out a way to fix it. It's not a simple ignore it. They got to do something with that. That being said, where are we at with the Ford camp, guys? Well, Ford is right now doing what they're doing, but they're really pushing this Maverick setup. They really want to make a sport pickup again, only I'm not calling it a pickup because it's a unibody truck. And in my mind, it's basically a unibody car with a box, aka maybe, what do they call it? El Camino, I think, was the GM Ranchero. There you go. Might as well call it the next Ranchero. But they're trying to come out with a sport version of this. For whatever reason, they feel that there's a market for it. So they're basically taking the same STI motor that appeared in the Fiesta, I believe it was. So you're going to take that same engine and slap that into the sport truck. They're calling it the Lobo. So again, we'll see how it is. I think they might have missed the mark on that one, and maybe that should have been done a while ago, but it is what it is. There's not much we could do kind of with where the trends are going on that. But as far as what I'm seeing, that part of the sport truck market is pretty much a market that's passed. There's not much of a driver demand for those sport trucks anymore. For the most part, we're starting to see even what we called the small trucks back in the day are starting to get supersized. So your Colorados, your Rangers, stuff like that used to be a lot smaller. In fact, just to give you an example, S15 GMC Jimmy, if you looked at or compared that to a Colorado nowadays, the size difference is dramatic. Everything's getting bigger when it comes to the mid-size market. So mid-size is getting to be really close to the same size as the full size. Matt, hi. Hi, Matt. Good to see you in here. So yeah, the full-size trucks have gotten a little bit bigger themselves. They have more payload. They have more towing capacity. We're starting to see even the big trucks get bigger. Your diesel truck component market has pretty much always kind of been where it's been. It really hasn't moved much, but the news from the Ford camp is they chose to convert one of those battery plants that they were supposed to make sure it was a battery plant. They decided to switch it last minute to a Super Duty plant. That will not be good for the Ford boys because the government will crack down on them. And there's going to be a lot more coming out of Ford camp that we're not going to like. They're about to turn all of their vehicles into basically rolling police cars. So the tech that they're playing around with, and I'm pretty sure they did this to stay out of hot water with the federal government after taking $9 billion to build a few battery plants. Because they're choosing not to build one of those battery plants, there's going to be a fallout. That fallout is going to come in the form of they're going to have to do things that the government wants that are going to be more control based. So what are we going to see? We're going to see Fords that are getting locked down, meaning that you need a dealer to unlock them. We're also going to start seeing them have more cameras and more recording features. These are going to be used to upload information to police departments to cut tickets for people who are speeding. Not only the Ford vehicle that's speeding, but maybe your vehicle that passes that Ford. So again, I'm paying very close attention to this, and if it goes in the wrong direction, I'll let you guys know as soon as I know. But as of right now, if that patent goes through and it starts getting pushed on every Ford vehicle, you will not even be able to speed in a vehicle that's not a Ford because your information will get snapped off your license plate and cameras on that Ford vehicle that will get sent to the police department, and they will just write you a ticket and mail it out to you. The only recourse we have in this long term is what they did with the traffic cameras. Now, some states still have traffic cameras, but a lot of states have chosen to not use them for ticket purposes. The reason why is because that camera did a poor job of taking a picture of the driver and getting the registration in the picture. That meant that people were going to court, they were fighting these tickets, and it was costing the court so much money that they were losing money every time they wrote a ticket. This is the only way the government learns their lesson, is it has to cost them money for them to learn. The only reason I'm getting into the whole government stuff, guys, now is because I'm far enough in the video that I don't have to worry about any of the censorship issues. Earlier in the video, we always do the demonstration portion. That's because I need to give it time before I can drop all of the rest of this information on the back half of my videos. The government is definitely after control. Vehicles are the method to control our movements. It is a fact. We have to look at the technology going in, how it's being used, and what they're capable of doing with that technology. So the more we look at it, the more we see what's going on, and the more we have to question, is this really for us, or is this for someone else to use against us? And one thing that I definitely am not a fan of is having my information get uploaded off of my vehicle. This is something that I got a little ticked off when I found this out, because what happened was this all got rolled into the repossession of vehicles, how they could click a button and your vehicle would drive away from you and go back to the dealer. This was designed to control certain situations. Also, they could shut it down if you got involved into a high-speed chase. So some people are seeing it as a good thing, but they're not looking at the negative ramifications. The negative is, if they already have access to that system, let's say they decide to do another scaredemic, they could just go in, flip a switch, and shut off all the cars. And that is what they're after. That's what they want. They want to control movement. This is why the EVs even got popular for just a second, because the government saw a way that they could control movement. EVs can't go as far as a gas vehicle. Never have, never will. The reason why is the technology isn't there. Also, the charging stations are not there and never will be there, because America is a big country and we're spread out quite a distance. EVs aren't going to cover that distance. It's been proven, and there's a lot of people, in fact, a huge amount. We're talking almost half of the people that own EVs currently said they would never buy another one. The reason why is the travel distance. They can't go where they need to go with them, so they're choosing to not buy another one when they buy another vehicle. This is a huge, huge deal. Right now, there's roughly about 3 million EVs on the road. In total, there's about 283 million vehicles on the road. So EVs only make up that small portion of it. The rest are gasoline engines. So as much as they want to tell you EV is taking off and it's popular, don't believe the lies. Don't listen to them, because it's true. They're not performing very well. You can see this in a lot of the sales numbers, and watch what the manufacturers are doing. They're moving away from EVs now. Why are they moving away? They're moving away because they realize the inefficiencies of these EVs. And people have already spoken out and said, we're not buying these expensive vehicles that when they break, they're going to cost us a car or the price of a car to fix. When the battery goes out, you're spending at least $27,000 to replace the battery. A lot of people won't tell you what the cost is, but knowing the cost helps you make an informed decision on what you're going to buy. Guys, this has been a great breakdown. Tomorrow, I will be going live. I may go live a little bit earlier. The reason why is I need to do the rear brakes on Malibu steel. So this is the rear rotor right here. This is what we're going to be installing tomorrow. And you guys are not going to see the reassembly process. This is going to be the teardown. And the teardown is going to show you guys exactly what you need to do when you take it all apart, and the inspection process of all the used parts you're going to choose to use. As you can tell, I have rotors and pads, so I'm not reusing my rotors. You guys already know that. The reason why is that my rotors are warped. So the previous owner did a pad slap, never replaced the rotors, and they were rough on the brakes, meaning that they warped the rotors. I'm putting in a new set of rotors, I'm putting in a new set of pads, and I'm making sure that everything moves like it's supposed to. In that video, I will show you guys how to make sure that that happens and what you need to clean up in order to make sure that the pads will float properly and not get stuck. That is the biggest factor to brake replacements. People that don't do these tricks oftentimes will have brakes that fail. But again, guys, thank you for all the support. Make sure you guys hit that like button, the subscribe button, ring that notification bell so you guys know when I go live. And I'll see you guys tomorrow, but probably after that, I'll always see you guys on Sunday between 1 and 2. I'll see you guys on the next one.